A very good afternoon. Today I'll be talking about in this lecture about metabolism of xenobiotics. So, xenobiotics are, I'll tell you in subsequent slides uh, what are xenobiotics, but for now, before even starting the lecture, uh, xenobiotics are foreign molecules to the body. So I would want you to ponder over this thing that why would you want to read about metabolism of xenobiotics? Or why are we even studying this topic? We are exposed to a wide variety of foreign chemicals, that is xenobiotics, both naturally occurring compounds in plant foods and synthetic compounds in medicines, food additives, and environmental pollutants. So, knowledge of the metabolism of xenobiotics is essential for an understanding of pharmacology. That is, if a person is taking a drug, so what effect will that drug have on the body? What would be its mechanism of action? And that particular individual, how will it respond to that? That is the genetics concerned with determining the likely response of an individual to that particular therapeutic drug administered, and also understanding the toxicology of various foreign molecules or xenobiotics and management of disease. I know as of now these terms may seem very confusing to you, but once I start the lecture, this will get more clear. And about the topic particularly, I want to stress that it is a new topic, it's a very small topic for that matter, but from exam point of view, certainly one or two questions will definitely be asked in the exam. And this topic actually forms basis of what you will read in pharmacology and medicine in subsequent years, because eventually in your training as a doctor, it is very important to understand that how various foreign molecules including drugs are metabolized in the body, how various drugs interact with each other, and the adverse events that could be seen, adverse effects of drugs could be seen, and how the dosage and administration of certain drugs is modified when you understand how they are metabolized. So, moving further with the lecture, the competency that will be covered is BI 7.5, and the specific learning objective for this lecture is that you should be, after this exercise, you should be able to describe and discuss the metabolism of xenobiotics and their role in health and disease. Okay. So, what are xenobiotics? Xenos in Greek means something that is foreign to life. So, whatever are macromolecules and micromolecules which we are composed of, anything besides that is foreign to life. So, any drug which is administered, it is foreign to life. So it has to be metabolized in the body, it would have some effect, and eventually it has to be excreted out of the body. Then certain chemical carcinogens which we are inadvertently exposed to. It could be from occupational hazard. It could be, for example, if you take grilled meat or something, so that will have some, partially oxidized products that could also act as carcinogens. Then naturally occurring compounds in plant foods which are at least foreign to our system. then inadvertently we are exposed to certain insecticides and pesticides also, because uh, the crops that are grown are, I mean, liberally, supplied with these pesticides and insecticides, and to an extent this comes into the our diet also. And of course, environmental pollutants, and those could be entering our body through oral ingestion, maybe through water or through skin, and inhalant uh, air pollutants. So there could be different routes. So if you are asked examples of xenobiotics, first is of course drugs, chemical carcinogens, food additives, plant products, insecticides, and environmental pollutants. Now, while the metabolism of xenobiotics is generally considered to be a process of detoxification, sometimes the metabolites of compounds that are themselves inert or harmless are biologically active. So, if you are asked what is xenobiotic metabolism, you'll definitely say detoxification reactions. That means something which was, inert or harmless, it has been converted into a biologically active form, it showed its effect, and then it was excreted out of the body. This may be desirable, as in the activation of a prodrug to the active compound. We'll see what's a prodrug in subsequent slide. Or the effect could be undesirable, as in the formation of a carcinogen or mutagen from an inert precursor. So the point I want to stress here is that xenobiotic metabolism is not simply drug metabolism or not simply detoxification reactions. The flip side of it is also to be seen, the other effect also to be seen, that it can convert certain inert, non-reactive intermediates into carcinogenic or mutagenic reactants. ओके सो जैसा मैंने कहा कि पहली बात जो हम बात करते हैं xenobiotic मेटाबॉलिज्म, इट इज़ रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर मेजॉरिटी ऑफ योर ड्रग मेटाबॉलिज्म. सो टू साइट फ्यू एग्जाम्पल्स हियर, I'll start with the prodrug. So a prodrug is actually a precursor or forerunner of a drug, and a prodrug must undergo chemical conversion by metabolic processes before becoming an active pharmacological agent. One example that I'll give here is sulfasalazine. Sulfasalazine, it's a prodrug used in treatment of inflammatory bowel disease for Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. It is not active in its ingested form. It has to be broken down by bacteria in the colon into two products, 5-amino salicylic acid, 5-ASA, and sulfapyridine, before it becomes active as a drug. So you can see the ingested form, which was inactive, it was broken down in with the enzymes probably present in the enterocytes to the active form by breaking down into two components, that is 5-ASA and sulfapyridine. Another example I'll cite here, which you are already, I guess, aware. If you remember hypocholesterolemic drugs, we talk about HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. So, bioconversion of lovastatin lactone to the active acid occurs in the liver, which is its site of action also. The oral bioavailability of the compound is poor owing to its metabolism in liver. The high local concentration at the target organ, that is liver, results in good efficacy. So it is metabolized at liver and shows its effect there itself. Now, what are the other effects besides pharmacological responses? It could also, xenobiotic metabolism could generate certain reactants which could be toxic. Covalent binding of xenobiotic metabolites to macromolecules including DNA, RNA and protein. It can lead to cell injury or cytotoxicity, which can be severe enough to result in cell death. Also, there could be generation of certain molecules which could elicit an immunological response. Let's understand how. So, the reactive metabolite which is formed of a xenobiotic, it may bind to a protein, acting as heptin and altering its antigenicity. Now you must be wondering, what is a heptin? Heptin is a small molecules which on their own they will not stimulate antibody production. That means as such in their own independent existence they will not elicit immunological response, but they do so when bound to a protein. So what happens? The reactive metabolite of a xenobiotic, it will bind to a protein and it will itself act as a heptin and alter the antigenicity of the protein. As a result, the antibodies that are produced, they react not only with the modified protein but also with the unmodified protein. So potentially imitating autoimmune disease. So can you see that how xenobiotic xenobiotics after metabolism, of course they lead to pharmacological responses, but they could also lead to toxicity, they could also elicit immunological response, and then last but not the least, reactions of activated species of chemical carcinogens with DNA are thought to be of great importance in chemical carcinogenesis. I'll cite the example here which must be mentioned in most of your textbooks. Benzopyrene, which is a polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon and found in coal tar and tobacco smoke. It after activation, it becomes carcinogenic. So I hope effects of xenobiotics are clear to you. And in the next slide, nothing but this is just summarized here, and it's a beautiful figure. I have taken it from 29th edition of Harper, and it's a simplified scheme showing how metabolism of a xenobiotic can result in cell injury, immunological response or immunological damage, to say it in better words, or mutation leading to tumorigenesis or carcinogenesis. One thing that you must be wondering here is that the normal fate would have been this, that is reactive metabolite being converted into non-toxic metabolite, this enzyme and this enzyme. Phase 1 and phase 2 reactions respectively. Phase 1 catalyzed by cytochrome P450 and phase 2 reaction, one of the main reaction is catalyzed by glutathione S transferase. So we'll talk about phase 1 and phase 2 reactions in detail. Moving to the next slide, biotransformation reactions. This is nothing but what we have already been talking about. So biotransformation reactions, biotransformation is the process whereby a substance is changed from one chemical to another by a chemical reaction within the body. And mind it, biotransformation is not exactly synonymous with detoxification. I am again stressing it here. Biotransformation is not exactly synonymous with detoxification, since in many cases the metabolites that are formed are more toxic than the parent substance, and that is known as bioactivation or entoxification reactions. Okay, so coming to the basic purpose of biotransformation reaction, we very well know that a drug, for example, a drug entering into our body and showing its effect, after showing its effect, it is converted to a certain metabolite. If that metabolite has to be excreted out of the body, it has to be made polar or water soluble. So biotransformation reactions, including phase 1 and phase 2 reaction, they do nothing but they convert lipophilic substances to hydrophilic compounds. That means they are aiding in their excretion. So what consequences will it have? Of course, change in solubility characteristics. So polar substances that are polar compounds that are water soluble, which are formed, they can be excreted in urine or bile. And very hydrophobic xenobiotics would persist in adipose tissue almost indefinitely if they were not converted to more polar forms. And of course, as I said, there could be, three fates of biotransformation reaction. First is, of course, it could lead to detoxification. That means inactivate non-reactive metabolite बन जाएगा आपके पास, inactivation, metabolic activation, or it could lead to formation of a toxic metabolite. So detoxification reactions, I think we have already talked about the drug metabolism that I cited few examples. And about metabolic activation, let me give you few examples here. Okay, before that, I think I'll start with this. So what are phase 1 and phase 2 reactions? So phase 1, the metabolism of xenobiotics is generally considered in two phases. In phase 1, the major reaction involved is hydroxylation, which is catalyzed mainly by members of a class of enzymes referred to as monooxygenases or cytochrome P450, or the third name that has come up latest and very much in use is mixed function oxidases. So we'll see why they are called mixed function oxidases. Monooxygenases, I think you can guess it from here if you have read enzymes, because they are incorporating single atom of oxygen, taking from a molecule of oxygen, they incorporate single atom of oxygen into the substrate. So in phase 1 reaction, xenobiotics are generally converted to more polar hydroxylated derivatives. Now once you have formed phase 1 derivatives, those will be subjected to phase 2 reactions, and in phase 2 reactions, these derivatives are conjugated with molecules such as glucuronic acid, sulfate or glutathione, which renders them eventually more water soluble, and they are eventually excreted in urine or bile. If you don't want to write biotransformation in words, you can just put these two slides. Biotransformation is detoxifying a potentially toxic xenobiotic, converting into an inactive metabolite, and also it means converting or activating or metabolically activating a relatively harmless xenobiotic into a reactive intermediate. To sum it up, I would say biotransformation has got both the meanings to it, that is detoxification of potentially toxic metabolite, also metabolic activation of a relatively harmless xenobiotic into a reactive intermediate. Okay, so let's come to phase 1 reactions now. Phase 1 reactions, also called as oxidative functionalization reactions. I'll repeat, phase 1 reactions are also called as oxidative functionalization reactions and are catalyzed mainly by members of a class of enzymes referred to as cytochrome P450 or monooxygenases or mixed function oxidases. And in phase 1, the major reaction involved is hydroxylation. In addition to hydroxylation, these enzymes catalyze a wide range of reactions, including those involving deamination, dehalogenation, desulfuration, epoxidation, peroxygenation, and reduction. Okay. Now, about cytochrome P450, which is the class of enzyme majorly responsible in phase 1 metabolism. Cytochrome P450 constitute a unique family of heme proteins present in bacteria, fungi, insects, plants, fish, mammals, and primates that catalyze the monooxygenation, that is, insertion of one atom of molecular oxygen. They catalyze monooxygenation of a large variety of structurally diverse compounds. And substrates for this enzyme system include both endogenously synthesized compounds such as cholesterol, steroid hormones, and fatty acids, and exogenous compounds such as drugs, food additives, components of cigarette smoke, pesticides, etc. So, when I'll be talking about cytochrome P450, I'll just not restrict myself to xenobiotics, but I'll talk about cytochrome P450 as such. So, and few words about this family of enzymes, cytochrome P450, how they are named. So, cytochrome P450 is named as capital CYP. This capital CYP is followed by an Arabic numeral which designates the family. And cytochrome P450 are included in the same family if they exhibit 40% or more amino acid sequence identity. The Arabic number is followed by a capital letter indicating the subfamily, and P450 are in the same subfamily if they exhibit greater than 55% of amino acid sequence identity. Same family if more than 40% amino acid sequence identity. Same subfamily if they have greater than 55% sequence identity. So, family designated by an Arabic numeral followed by a capital letter which signifies subfamily. Then, individual P450s are assigned Arabic numerals in their subfamily. For example, it's CYP1A1. That means it is a cytochrome P450 belonging to family 1, subfamily A, and is the first individual member of that subfamily. I hope it is clear. And the nomenclature for the genes encoding cytochrome P450s is the same, except italics are used. So CYP1A1, if you want to denote the gene encoding this particular member of class of enzyme, you'll just put it in italics. Okay. So about cytochrome P450, I'll tell you here that there are certain points that I think you need to listen to very carefully. That cytochrome P450 are involved in phase 1 metabolism of a large number of xenobiotics, including perhaps 50% of the clinically used drugs, and they may increase, decrease, or not affect the activities of various drugs. They are involved in the metabolism of many endogenous compounds, for example, steroids. All are hemoproteins, they all have heme. They often exhibit broad substrate specificity, thus acting on many compounds, and consequently different P450s may catalyze formation of the same product. They are extremely versatile catalysts, perhaps catalyzing about 60 types of reactions, and basically the reaction remains same, that is introduction of one atom of oxygen into the substrate and one into water. Their hydroxylated products produced in phase 1 metabolism are more water soluble than their generally lipophilic substrates, facilitating excretion. Liver contains highest amounts, but they are found in most, if not all, tissues, including small intestine, lung, and brain. They are located in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum or in mitochondria, if that's a steroidogenic hormone. In some cases, their products are mutagenic or carcinogenic. Many of them have a molecular mass of about 55 kilodalton. And very important thing about cytochrome P450, about which we'll read in detail, that many are inducible. That means their synthesis or their amount can be increased or upregulated by certain stimulants. And what is the result? It leads to various drug interactions. Like induction, they are also inhibited by various drugs or their metabolic products, providing another cause of drug interactions. And another peculiar thing about them is that they exhibit genetic polymorphisms. That means if you administer the same amount of drug, drug in the same dosage to two different people and they respond differently to that particular drug, why has that happened? Because their cytochrome P450s differ from each other. So, they exhibit genetic polymorphisms which can result in atypical drug metabolism. Their activities may be altered in diseased tissues, for example, cirrhosis, which affects drug metabolism. And last but not the least, genotyping the P450 profile of patients, for example, to detect polymorphism in the future may permit individualization of drug therapy. So, I think you know that human genome has already been sequenced, and once you know what response will a person have to this particular drug and in what amount, so you can have a individualized regime of treatment for a patient. So you have a more specific, more precise approach based on the cytochrome profile, cytochrome P450 profile of that person. I know it sounds very fancy, but then it is the future. And coming to why cytochrome P450 is called P450. Cytochrome P450 is so named because when it was originally discovered, it was noted that preparations of microsomes are nothing but fragments of endoplasmic reticulum. So it was noted that preparations of microsomes that had been chemically reduced and then exposed to carbon monoxide, they exhibited an absorption peak at 450 nanometer. So carbon monoxide actually binds to the reduced ferrous form present in the heme, and when you expose it to light, it gives a unique absorbance spectrum at 450 nanometer. So it's a pigment with an absorbance at 450 nanometer, and minded this spectrum is characteristic of a heme thiolate liganded protein. Okay, so now coming to the reaction, basic reaction that they catalyze, if you can see here, we have a substrate RH and molecular oxygen is there. Along with that you have NADPH. Now what are the products being formed? ROH and water. So one of the oxygen atom from this molecular oxygen has been inserted in this substrate RH to give you a hydroxylated product, that is ROH. Along with that, a molecule of water is produced in which oxygen is contributed by this molecular oxygen. Inserting a single atom of oxygen, thus the name monooxygenases. Why mixed function oxidases? This dual fate of the oxygen accounts for the naming of the monooxygenases as mixed function oxidases. And using this particular isotope 18 oxygen 2, it has been shown that one atom is going into forming hydroxyl group of ROH and other forms the water. So you have to remember basic reaction, this basic reaction. And what is the role of NADPH here? I think you can very well make out this, that role of NADPH is to reduce cytochrome P450. And the reduced cytochrome then reduces the oxygen to water and the hydroxyl group that is introduced into the substrate. It may look very simple here, but the reaction mechanism is somewhat complex. Let's try to understand it to an extent. Okay. So this is also called a cytochrome P450 hydroxylase cycle. The system shown here is typical of steroid hydroxylases of the adrenal cortex. So as you can see in the figure, oxygen accepts the electron from cytochrome P450 and gets reduced to form water, with one atom being incorporated into water and the other into the substrate, usually resulting in its hydroxylation. This AOH is the product which has been formed after phase 1 metabolism, catalyzed by cytochrome P450. This series, the whole series of enzymatic reactions, NADPH, FAD, then iron sulfur centers, oxygen taking part here. This series of enzymatic reactions is known as the hydroxylase cycle. Now there are few differences between hydroxylases seen in adrenal cortex and in liver. So liver microsomal cytochrome P450 hydroxylase, it does not require iron sulfur protein Fe2S2. And in the endoplasmic reticulum of the liver, cytochrome P450 are found together with another heme containing protein, that is cytochrome B5. And together they have a major role in drug metabolism and detoxification. Cytochrome B5 also has an important role as a fatty acid desaturase. Together, cytochrome P450 and B5 are responsible for about 75% of the modification and degradation of drugs which occurs in the body. Now I'll give you a few examples of how certain drugs are what are various hydroxylation reactions, or to give you the list, phase 1 reactions. If someone asks you phase 1 reaction, the first reaction that should strike to you is hydroxylation reaction. It could be aliphatic or it could be aromatic. So to give you a few examples of hydroxylation reactions: biosynthesis of steroid hormones from cholesterol. There is hydroxylation at C22 and C20 in side chain cleavage and at 11 beta and 18 positions. Then more common example that you must be very well aware, that is renal systems catalyzing 1 alpha and 25 hydroxylations of 25 hydroxycholecalciferol in vitamin D metabolism. Then cholesterol 7 alpha hydroxylase and sterol 27 hydroxylase involved in bile acid synthesis from cholesterol in the liver. So I think from these examples you can conclude that cytochrome P450 are present in highest amount in liver cells and enterocytes, but are probably present in all tissues. Besides hydroxylation reactions, phase 1 reactions also have certain more reactions like epoxidation, dealkylation reaction, sulfoxidation, dehalogenation, deamination, peroxidation and reduction, but hydroxylation reactions remain the most common phase 1 reactions. In the last slide I talked about steroid genesis, hormone biosynthesis, drug detoxification, but as I mentioned earlier, there are certain there could be certain reactive metabolites also formed which are toxic to the body. And to give you few examples, vinyl chloride, it undergoes epoxidation to form vinyl chloride epoxide, which can bind to DNA and RNA and could be carcinogenic. And to tell you about an epoxide is a cyclic ether with a 3-atom ring. It's a cyclic ether with a 3-atom ring and it is a highly reactive molecule. Another example which you must have read when you read enzyme inhibition, methanol to formic acid. Formic acid is very toxic. So that is also one intoxication reaction. And benzopyrene, which is present in coal tar and tobacco smoke and grilled meat जब लेते हैं तो जो उससे जो charring होती है उससे produce होता है benzopyrene. It is also converted to its epoxide in phase 1 metabolism, and after epoxidation it is carcinogenic. Okay. Now coming to cytochrome P450 induction and inhibition. Most isoforms of cytochrome P450 are inducible. Now let us understand what this term means actually, inducible or inhibited. For instance, the administration of phenobarbital or other drugs causes hypertrophy of the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and 3 to 4 fold increase in endoplasmic reticulum. The administration of phenobarbital or other drugs causes hypertrophy of smooth endoplasmic reticulum and 3 to 4 fold increase in amount of cytochrome P450 within 4 to 5 days. And in most cases, this involves increased transcription of mRNA for that particular gene, for that enzyme, P450 enzyme. However, in some cases, induction involves stabilization of mRNA or the enzyme protein itself, or an increase in the translation of mRNA. Now, induction of cytochrome P450 underlies various drug interactions. When the effects of one drug are altered by prior, concurrent or later administration of another drug. This will be more clear to you when I give you few examples. For example, if you have a female patient of tuberculosis, pulmonary tuberculosis, and you start that patient on anti-tubercular therapy. Rifampicin, it's one of the key component of anti-tubercular therapy which is administered. So what, and this lady, this female is like a 30-year-old female who also takes oral contraceptive pills having ethinyl estradiol as the active agent. So what happens? Rifampicin leads to induction of CYP3A4, which metabolizes rifampicin as well as ethinyl estradiol. So what would happen? Rifampicin ने CYP3A4 को इंड्यूस कर दिया. उससे क्या होगा? Ethinyl estradiol, it will be eliminated fast. So if it is eliminated fast, the plasma levels of the drug which you want to achieve will be sub-effective. And if this patient does not use any other contraceptive modality, she has an increased risk of getting pregnant. Am I clear here? So while prescribing drugs, you have to take drug history from the patient. So while starting this lady on anti-tubercular therapy, she should have been asked that, do you take any other drug? And in case if you still have to give rifampicin, of course ATT is much more important to administer, you have to tell her that please use another contraceptive method, else there is a risk involved. There is a risk that it could lead to pregnancy. That could be undesirable totally. Another example, in this case, let's say this lady has a seizure disorder, is epileptic, and is on anticonvulsant drugs, phenytoin and carbamazepine. Now these anticonvulsant drugs also induce CYP3A4, and these will also decrease the contraceptive potency of ethinyl estradiol. Another example here, and a very commonly asked example to you: induction of CYP2C9 by phenobarbital. Phenobarbital is again anticonvulsant drug. So for example, if you have a patient who is epileptic and is on anticonvulsant drug or is on phenobarbital, and he has undergone a cardiac surgery, and you put the patient on anticoagulant warfarin because you want the blood to be little having less tendency to coagulate, less thinner, so you put the patient on warfarin. Now what happens? This phenobarbital induces this enzyme CYP2C9. So अभी ये क्या करेगा? ये वॉरफरिन जो आप डोज दे रहे थे उसका मेटाबॉलिज्म बढ़ा देगा. तो क्या होगा? वॉरफरिन की जो है एफिकेसी रिड्यूस हो जाएगी. The anticoagulant effect which you wanted to achieve with that dose will be less, and in such a patient who is already on phenobarbital and you want to give anticoagulant warfarin, you'll have to adjust the dose. You'll have to up the dose in such a patient. So again, you have to consider various drug-drug reactions here. Another example, taking ketoconazole, which is an antifungal drug, or even drinking grapefruit juice. Grapefruit juice contains a variety of furanocoumarins. They both inhibit CYP3A4. And this does opposite to what phenobarbital was doing. This inhibits CYP3A4. तो जब CYP3A4 इनहिबिट हो जाएगा तो वॉरफरिन का उतना ही डोज इट विल प्रिवेल एट इफेक्टिव प्लाज्मा लेवल्स फॉर मोर टाइम, So that could lead to excessive bleeding. In such a patient, you have to decrease the amount of warfarin that you need to administer to achieve the same effect. Right? So I think by now you realize how important it is to ask the drug history from the patient. And of course, after asking, you should know what are the various drug interactions. And for knowing various drug-drug interactions, you have to know which drug induces cytochrome P450 and which drug inhibits. Right? Okay. Now coming to genetic polymorphisms of P450 enzyme, polymorphism of cytochrome P450 may explain much of the variations in drug responses noted among many patients. Variants with low catalytic activity will lead to slower metabolism of the substrate and hence prolonged drug action and accumulation of the drug in the body. I think I'll be more clear when I cite this example. One interesting polymorphism is that of CYP2A6, which is involved in the metabolism of nicotine to conitine. 3 CYP2A6 alleles have been identified, a wild type and 2 null or inactive alleles. It has been reported that individuals with the null alleles who have impaired metabolism of nicotine are apparently protected against becoming tobacco dependent smokers. These individuals smoke less, presumably because their blood and brain concentrations of nicotine remain elevated longer than those of individuals with the wild type allele. And it has been speculated that inhibiting CYP2A6 may provide a novel way to help smoking cessation. Another example here, warfarin is metabolized by CYP2C9 for elimination, and CYP2C9 star 3, it's an allelic variant in which isoleucine is substituted for leucine at residue 359, which results in substantial loss of enzymatic activity. Now what happens? Individuals who are deficient in CYP2C9, they may require only 0.5 to 1 milligram of warfarin per week, in contrast to the usual dose, that is 4 to 5 milligram per day prescribed for an individual with normal CYP2C9. Why? Because in that particular allelic variant where isoleucine was substituted for leucine at 359 position, what happened? The CYP2C9, it was deficient. So warfarin was working for a longer period of time, maintaining effective plasma levels. So in this case, you have to maintain the patient on a lower dose. Now I think by now you can be very concluding about it, that how knowing the cytochrome P450 profile of a patient is so important to decide on dosages of various drugs. For example, a patient who requires 0.5 to 1 milligram of warfarin per week, if you give him like 4 to 5 milligram per day, he's definitely gonna land up in bleeding disorders. Of course, you have to consider other factors. What is the incidence, what is the prevalence of certain allelic variants, but I think you do get an insight into individual based medicine approach here. Okay, so I think we are done with cytochrome P450 here. Coming to phase 2 reactions. So in phase 1 reaction, xenobiotics were converted to more polar and hydroxylated derivatives. Now in phase 2 reactions, these derivatives are conjugated with molecules such as glucuronic acid, sulfate or glutathione, and this renders them even more water soluble, and they are eventually excreted in urine or bile. Talking about glucuronidation, I think the very important example which you have read in detail is UDP glucuronic acid molecule, which is attached to bilirubin in its metabolism and catalyzed by a variety of glucuronosyl transferases which are present in endoplasmic reticulum and cytosol. Besides bilirubin, molecules such as 2-acetyl aminofluorine, which is a carcinogen, aniline, benzoic acid, meprobamate, which is a tranquilizer, phenol, and many steroids are excreted as glucuronides. And glucuronide group may be attached to oxygen, nitrogen, or sulfur groups of the substrate. And minded, glucuronidation is probably the most frequent conjugation reaction. Talking about sulfation, some alcohols, arylamines and phenols are sulfated, and the sulfate donor is adenosine 3' phosphate 5' phosphosulfate, which we know as PAPS, or also called as active sulfate. Most important and most detailed discussion is about conjugation with glutathione, because glutathione is a very important molecule. Not just we will talk about its role in phase 2 reactions, but otherwise also I'll talk about what is the role of glutathione in body, restricting myself here in this particular slide to phase 2 reaction. So conjugation with glutathione catalyzed by glutathione S transferases. So what happens, the tripeptide glutathione, that is gamma glutamyl cystenyl glycine, it is important in the phase 2 metabolism of electrophilic compounds, forming glutathione S conjugates that are excreted in urine and bile. And the reaction catalyzed by GST is R plus GSH. GSH is nothing but glutathione, to form RSG, where R is an electrophilic compound. I think this query was also asked by one of the students, so I hope it gets clear now. So the reaction catalyzed by glutathione S transferases R plus GSH gives you RSG. There are 4 classes of cytosolic glutathione S transferase and 2 classes of microsomal membrane bound enzyme. And GSTs are homo or heterodimers of at least 7 different types of subunit, and different subunits are induced by different xenobiotics. And because glutathione S transferases also bind a number of ligands that are not substrates, including bilirubin, steroid hormones, and some carcinogens, they are sometimes known as ligandin. Liver has a very high activity of glutathione S transferase, and in vitro the entire pool of glutathione can be depleted within minutes on exposure to xenobiotic substrates. And activity of GST is upregulated in many tumors, leading to resistance to chemotherapy. Now, besides the major role in phase 2 metabolism of xenobiotics, glutathione has many other functions, and it's a very favorite question of examiners. So just read it thoroughly. Since it's a reducing substance, it maintains sulfhydryl groups of proteins in the reduced state. It's also an important intracellular reductant and antioxidant, and maintains sulfhydryl groups of various enzymes and proteins in their reduced states. Also helps to maintain ion of heme in the ferrous state. It serves as a reducing agent for glutaredoxin and deoxyribonucleotide synthesis. And the reaction catalyzed by glutathione peroxidase where H2O2 is converted to water. There also it has a role. And glutathione as a carrier. Minded, there is a metabolic cycle involving glutathione as a carrier. It has been implicated in transport of some amino acids across the membranes in the kidney. So I haven't shown the reaction, but I'll just tell you what is the reaction of the cycle. So amino acid is taken up by glutathione. It is combined with glutathione and it forms gamma glutamyl amino acid and cystenyl glycine. I'll repeat, amino acid plus glutathione gives you gamma glutamyl amino acid and cystenyl glycine. And the enzyme that catalyzes this reaction is gamma glutamyl transferase or GGT. So this reaction transfers amino acids across the plasma membrane, the amino acid being subsequently hydrolyzed from its complex with glutamate and the glutathione being resynthesized from cystenyl glycine. And briefly about this particular enzyme, GGT or gamma glutamyl transferase, it is present in plasma membrane of renal tubular cells and bile ductule cells and in endoplasmic reticulum of hepatocytes, and has a specific diagnostic value in diagnosing alcoholic liver disease and other hepatobiliary diseases. Okay. So this was about conjugation with glutathione and other functions of glutathione. The other two reactions that take place in phase 2 are acetylation. So what happens? The reaction could be X plus acetyl CoA, which will give you acetyl X plus coenzyme A, where your X is xenobiotic and acetyl donor is your acetyl CoA. And the reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme acetyl transferases, which are present in cytosol of various tissues, particularly liver. To cite an example here, I'll give you another example from antitubercular drug, which is isoniazid. It is subjected to acetylation, and there is polymorphism seen in case of acetyl transferases. So you have two sorts of individuals. One are slow acetylators and others are fast acetylators, and clinical implication of this is that slow acetylators are more subject to the toxic effects of isoniazid because the drug persists longer in these people. So I think I can conclude from here that slow acetylators are more at developing hepatotoxicity due to isoniazid. Then last is methylation reaction. Few xenobiotics are subjected to methylation by enzymes methyl transferases, and methyl donor is, of course you have read about it. It is S-adenosyl methionine or SAM. So I think we are done with this lecture. I'll just summarize the whole lecture now. Biotransformation is the process where a substance is changed from one chemical to another by a chemical reaction within the body, and the biochemical process where noxious substances are rendered less harmful and more water soluble, more polar, are known as detoxification reactions. And xenobiotics are compounds which may be accidentally ingested or taken as drugs or compounds produced in the body by bacterial metabolism. Almost all common drugs are metabolized by P450 system, and biotransformation reactions, they are phase 1 and phase 2 reaction. Phase 1 is alteration of the foreign molecule, that is, what do we call it? We call it oxidative functionalization reactions, and phase 2 reactions, we call them biosynthetic reactions, where you actually add a functional, you actually conjugate them with some molecule, rendering them even more water soluble so that they can be excreted in bile, urine or feces. And this figure basically summarizes that how a xenobiotic is undergoes detoxification reactions, or and it can also undergo intoxication reactions, and what could be the toxic effects of xenobiotics. So with this, I'll end my lecture here, and there are certain assignment questions. Before that, a quick revision. Most common phase 1 reaction is hydroxylation. Most frequent conjugation reaction, phase 2, is glucuronidation. And phase 1 hydroxylation, phase 2 conjugation, and cytochrome P450 catalyzes most phase 1 hydroxylation reaction, and cytochrome P450, why? Because absorption peak is at 450 nanometer. And I'll end this session here, and there are few assignment questions. I have kept them intentionally very few so that you can attempt and come back with your doubts tomorrow afternoon when I schedule a session on WhatsApp. And I'll also be posting few multiple choice questions and a case history or a problem something. So and these were my references for this particular lecture, and that's it. Thank you.